Okay. So all right, there we go. And if you want, T-Dog, I can just do the advancing, or
Yeah.
you can be in control, whichever you prefer.
Nope, the advancing is great.
Okay.
So,
It's just like back when I got hired and I was like your assistant 20 years ago.
exactly. So
Yeah.
hi everybody, my name is Teresa Gamble, and I am going to talk about sewing related social media for the next 10 to 12 minutes. Next slide. So professionally, I am a scientist, but sewing is one of my hobbies, and I would say I'm an aspirational sewist. I'm not an advanced sewist, but I think the idea of being able to make your own clothes and whatever you need to dress yourself and your family and your friends is a really good skill to have. And in the past, I never understood social media. I didn't have any kind of social media. I didn't understand why people liked it. I was like, I don't get it. In fact, I only had a Facebook account because I was forced to at work so that I could follow the HPDN Facebook account. So relatively recently, and related to COVID, I was introduced to TikTok. And I finally began to understand why people like social media so much. And for me, it was very related to the fact that it expanded my world so much with regard to seeing people who are doing things that I aspire to. So seeing other people like me sewing and talking about their sewing journey. So what I'm going to talk about, next slide please, is what I found with regard to different kinds of accounts. And I originally gave this presentation to the American Sewing Guild that I belong to because it's a group that would like to have more of a presence in social media. And the average age, I mean, my hair is gray, but I'm sure the average age in the American Sewing Guild is probably 20 years older than I am, and I'm in my 50s. So they don't know a lot about it. So a lot of this is a subset of this talk to sort of give them an idea of what's out there, because I found it very interesting. Okay, so I'm going to talk about professional accounts, small business accounts, and individual sews. Next slide. So when I talk about professional accounts, can you raise your hand if anybody's heard of Joann's?
Oh.
Okay, all right. So you guys know that Joann's is a big box store that's all over America. It used to be a place that just sold fabric, and it sells more now. Some of the other professional accounts that I'm using as an example are Mulberry Silks, which is a beautiful fabric store here in Carborough. Mood Fabrics, which is a very famous fabric store in New York City. And then the one I'm going to talk about more in detail is Liberty London. Liberties in London is a giant department store that actually started out by importing lots and lots of fabrics from the East, lots of silks, and then went on to make their own absolutely world famous cotton. It is one of the most beautiful cottons you can buy. It's still available.
I've seen the mill where it was produced.
Yes, exactly.
In
There's
London?
a long, long history of it. So let me show you what a professional social media account will put on their accounts. Next. So I want you to take a look at these pictures. This is a single post that was on Facebook by Liberties. It is about fabric that they have on sale. You can see that it's absolutely gorgeously produced. So they're making a very good effort to show what the fabric looks like. These pictures right here are not dresses. This is fabric draped on mannequins to make it look absolutely elegant. And it also tells a little story about the designer. So over many, many decades, they've had collaborations with very famous designers to make their fabrics. And they brought this one out again. This woman was from Trinidad and Tobago, and they sort of reissued it in some different colorways. So you can see very high end. So next slide, please. So what do these professional accounts have in common? So all of them are very, very high quality professionals. They have multiple platforms. That post that I just showed you wasn't just on Facebook. It was on Facebook and it was on Instagram. And they have very high frequency posting. So on the day that I originally made this talk, it was a Sunday, and I was looking at the different ones, and Joann's posted probably 4 posts just in the couple hours I was working on it. Like up. They're posting all the time. It's clearly professionally managed, and it's very likely to be managed by someone who is paid to manage a social media account. But what is the purpose? So I believe that these accounts are trying to sell you something, but most of the time indirectly. So I consider them to be eye candy. They want you to know their brand. They want you to come to their store. But it's not like usually you click on something, you contact somebody in Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and purchase something. It's really about creating their brand in the world and kind of keeping people aware of it. Next slide. So the next level are small business accounts. So these are people who have usually own their own business just by themselves, probably don't have any employees, but they do something that they sell online. So this first one, which I'm going to go in more detail, is a woman from Canada who has been sewing clothes for probably 15 years and selling them through the internet just as an individual. This woman, BB Handbags, was in upholstery. She did her whole career in upholstery, and when she quit, she said, I'm going to use my skills, and she makes absolutely beautiful handbags. And shows posts about her, shows her sewing them, making them, and then she sells them on the internet. Swanson's fabric is very interesting. That's a woman who says there is more fabric in the world than we ever need. Not a single new piece of fabric would have to be made, and we could keep everybody clothed. And so her business is based on getting donations from anywhere where fabric is left over or people don't want it anymore, and she sells everything for $4 a yard. Everything. It doesn't matter how much it, what it is of value. And she has a very strong sense of keeping fabric out of the landfill. That's becoming garbage. And then the last one is a woman who said, I want underwear that fits. I want panties that fit. I want a bra that fits. I want them to be beautiful. I want to make them myself. And she developed that into learning herself, teaching other people. She teaches classes, and she sells kits now that you can buy and make your own. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this one, Rishi. So this is a picture of her post. This one happens to be from Instagram. And the first thing I want you guys to notice is what it's a picture of. So these are shirts that she made out of leftover scraps of sort of her main line of clothing. So she's telling people, I also want to use my scraps. I don't want to be wasteful. These are unique. These are one of a kind. And you can see it's not professional photography. I mean, she probably did it on her phone and put it together and put it online. And in her description, she says, these are coming. These are one of a kind. This is when you can DM me and buy one of them.
DM is
directly message me. Exactly, directly message me.
right.
So here are some posts from the other people. This is a picture of the woman who learned how to make her own underwear, is teaching people how to make their own underwear. And she is working very hard to make it accessible to everyone. I mean, you can see different shapes, different sizes, different colors. She's really making an effort to make this available to whoever wants to do it.
It's kind of an eye-catching post, really.
Yeah.
For you, Sam.
This one is Swanson's fabric. This is the woman who is taking fabric that people is left over, don't want anymore, whatever, and reselling it. It says trash rich. So she has a very strong presence about sort of the philosophy behind why she's doing the business that she is. So what are some things to note about these small business accounts? So it's lower or mixed quality production. You have a very nice photograph here, but you also have, maybe she had this one done professionally, this one, but oftentimes it's just snapshots like on the other ones. They might be on different kinds of platforms, but they don't have a lot of uniformity. They might have, their little logo might look different on Facebook than it does on Instagram than it does on TikTok, because they're not so worried about branding themselves professionally, right? They are interested in finding loyal customers and talking to them one-on-one. Mid to high frequency posting. A lot of these people will say, look, this is what I'm working on. I'm going on vacation. I'm not going to post anything for a couple weeks. I'll see you when I get back, right? Very one-on-one. And it's semi-professionally managed. I mean, they have a business, so you can say it's professional, but they do it themselves, essentially. And what they do that got me hooked on it is that they do a lot of sewing tips and tricks. They will do a little video on how to sew a zipper. They will do a little video on how to fit something at the waist. They will do a little video on the difference between kinds of fabric. And it draws in their audience and sort of keeps you engaged, because that's what they do for a living. So they are trying to directly sell you something, but their personalities and their philosophies really shine through in their accounts. let me talk to you about a couple individual sews. So now we're going down to the third tier here. So these are people who love to sew. They sew for different kinds of reasons, and they share their sewing on social media because they want to be part of a sewing community. So I'm going to talk about these two, Kate Makes and Lexi Sylvester. Can you go to the next one? So Kate Makes does not sew professionally, but she is an absolutely beautiful seamstress. And she spends a lot of time online talking about her own personal creative process and teaching other people to do the things that she does. So this is an Instagram post, but the same post was sort of a TikTok video where she explained how she made these absolutely beautiful embroidered flowers that then went on a dress that she went on and finished. And she started by designing them by hand on a computer. I mean, clearly this woman has talent, right? Next slide. And this is Lexi Sylvester. Lexi Sylvester is a transgender woman, and I'm actually going to read the quote because it's a video and you will appreciate it better if you see it. So she said, "I sew my own clothes because nothing ever fits me in a store. When I sew for myself, I have control of where the waist goes, how big the pockets are, how many buttons, how long something is, and I need that because I'm a trans woman and much taller than the average lady. And I am far from the only person alienated by the way ready-to-wear clothes either size me. You are probably a person who doesn't fit into ready-to-wear clothes that well either." And I just want to comment on that to the women who probably understand this better than men. It is very, very difficult to go shopping and feel good in what you take off of the rack. I don't think there's a woman who doesn't have that experience, and I really related to that when I saw his post. Cheers. Next.
Yeah.
So here's me. I'm on Instagram. As you can see, the picture is a long time ago, and the only thing I ever put on Instagrams are things that I sew. I maybe will tag Spoonflower because I bought something from them, but it's just some random post. And that's it. I don't comment, I don't share, I don't make videos, I don't put pictures of myself, just the thing I say. Next. So what's to note about these individual sews? So lower mixed quality production, different logos, different platforms, no logos. It is not, these people are not doing this for a brand. They are running personal accounts about their own sewing, and occasionally some are transitioning to a place where maybe they might sell something on Etsy. I do see that, occasionally. Posting is highly variable. You might see a whole slew of posts from somebody on a project, and you might see me, who the last post was probably 8 months ago when I finally finished. And this is their personal account, so it's not just sewing. You see pictures of their cats, their dogs, their kids, their other hobbies, whatever it is they had for lunch. So it's a mix. Generally, they are not trying to sell you anything, but they have very authentic voices, and there is room for everyone. Oh,
Buster.
Go back.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to say that this is from my Instagram. I made this quilted bag,
wow.
and this fabric right here is from Smith. And this, you guys saw this before. Next slide. So I just want to say thank you. That's me and my dog, Einstein. And for listening. I hope that you guys learned something. I know that there's probably not too many people who sew here, but I hope the idea that there's sort of these different levels on social media to have access to whatever your own interests and hobbies are have come through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I inspired you to sew it. Of course, I don't know if I'll get to it. But how did you find these sews?
So if you remember at the beginning,
Probably not.
I wasn't on social media at all, and I started to get into social media because of TikTok. And TikTok comes and it's just kind of random at the beginning. And I probably saw a post go by that was on sewing, and I liked it or commented on it or interacted with that. And then I could go to that post and I could see other people who were coming on. So I sort of over time grew my favorites page with these different people. So it was sort of like a
So you teach the algorithm.
You teach the algorithm, yes. I mean, I didn't know I was doing that at the time because I didn't understand that much about TikTok. There are ways with hashtags and things that you can do searches, but I usually wasn't that clever.
And so how did you get interested in TikTok itself? Because
So that is a question that I was trying to think of the answer to, actually. I'm trying to think of who introduced us to TikTok. Do you remember someone? I think it was something like somebody sent me a text that had a TikTok, video in it, and I was like, what is this? Oh, I have to download this, something like that. So I did it, and then, I mean, anybody who knows TikTok, I mean, I guess it's the same for all social media, but it is designed to be terribly addicting. I mean, you can scroll forever. And so, I mean, I have to say that I personally am very cautious with my TikToking because I can get lost in it and be lost hours and hours. And I've found it's better to focus on the people I like and go back and it's it's designed to be addictive. I think it's designed to pull you in and keep you in. So I'm very cautious.
It doesn't show me any sewing videos.
Well, all the links are there. You can go look at it.
It's just twerking.
it knows your algorithm.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say that, when I thought of the Chautauqua, I floated it by a handful of people, well before the pandemic, including Teresa. She was one of the first people I thought of who'd be great at. She has so many interests, and she's such a great presenter. And then she was like, "Well," I was like, "I want you to be one of our first presenters." She's like, "I have a thing on social media and sewing." I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, sure." But then I thought I'm like, "Oh yeah." I mean, like Teresa, she'd be like, "This is a paper bag," and 20 minutes later, I'd be like, "Awesome, I got a paper bag. Cool." So thank you for delivering the goods as expected. Stephen is not a good presenter, but he has a cool thing that he can talk about. So that's the other way you can get into the Chautauqua. Yeah, it's like, no, I'm kidding. Actually, I don't think I've ever seen you present anything, Stephen, but
Your intuition is correct.
I doubt that very much. But before you, oh, you can drive. Okay. Will you do that from your phone, or will you do that from?
I'll do that with your computer.
I see. So you think? Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll let you take over.
How are you?
All right.
Never happened. Oh.
So I don't immediately think sewing when I see that first image.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, see, here's the thing. Sam at the last minute called because I've talked about how Spoonflower started a lot over the years, so I don't really have to think about that. Sam called.
That's the only reason he agreed to do this.
Right.
Yeah, understood. I get it.
Sam called me and said, "Can you make it personal?"
Let's
I'd
get
be interested
personal.
in that, and why you would do something like that, because if you hear the story, it's a sort of high risk venture. So I'm here to tell you, I was a born entrepreneur, guns blazing, fearless, high risk taker from an early age. If you can't tell.
Were you actually working for the FBI? At the age of 5? Is that what we're seeing here with your Tommy gun?
Well, you notice I have Snoopy on my head.
You're kind of sending mixed messages.
Right.
I love your shoes.
Thank you. In the corduroy pants.
Yeah.
So toy guns in the 70s were different from toy guns now. Anyway, so my dad was an entrepreneur, actually. He was an immigrant. He grew up in British Honduras and came to the United States by himself as a teenager to go to boarding school and never went home and hardly ever saw his parents again. But at Georgia Tech, he dropped out of the engineering program at one point and went to art school and got a job with Rich's department store right out of the art school in Atlanta. and doing their marketing and advertising, working in that department, and a few years later went out on his own and started his own advertising agency, which was really just, you know, a two person agency. It was him and a secretary, sometimes him and an artist and a secretary. But I guess what I would say about that is, you know, of course I liked as a kid that my dad had his own company. But the most important thing to me about my dad was what I perceived to be the most salient part of his identity was that he was a businessman. And I decided I did not want to be a businessman.
That was a flag you were flying to convey that message.
Yeah. I remember having an argument with my dad at I was probably 18 or 19, and he said he was not an aggro. He wasn't a high pressure guy at all. But he said something along the lines of what are you going to do with your life? Like live under a bridge? And I was like, exactly. That's exactly what I want to do. I had no interest in being a businessman. My mom had a master's degree in English, and that was more my thing. So I majored in English at UNC, and I waited tables for a couple years after I graduated, and then I set out for Guatemala, planning never to come back. But I came back 6 months later
with dysentery.
And I moved out to the West Coast and to live with a buddy, and I got a job with a publishing services company, typesetting books, which was kind of fun. But I quit that job because I wanted to climb a mountain. That's the kind of thing I did. And ran out of money and had to take a temp job. And the temp job put me in my first corporate job. And, I was on the 26th floor of a building in downtown Oakland. And before I knew it, they had offered me a real job at a salary that I had never imagined, like $40,000 a year or something. And even though I thought of myself as a complete anomaly in this office high-rise, they were actually super nice to me and found me to be sufficiently valuable to pay me even more. And that was my first experience of actually being in business. And it wasn't as bad as I thought, even though I really hated the job. I really hated it. I ended up coming back.
Is that you?
I had forgotten this image. It's too bad there's not more detail because the perspective is totally off in this. If you could see him, his skeleton's like backwards. But I ended up moving back to this area after I lived in California and went back to Atlanta for a couple of years and came back here. My mother got cancer, and I helped nurse her through her untimely demise. And I really, at that point, I had quit the corporate job, had no fucking idea at all what I wanted to do. I had applied and been accepted to law school, gotten a scholarship, rejected it, decided not to do that. I really had no idea. And a guy I met at a Christmas party, whose name was Gart Davis, had been asked to put together something called Lulu Tech Circus, which was supposed to be a technology-related event at the state fairground. The guy who had asked him to do that was Bob Young, who had founded Red Hat Software. Bob had made $1 billion when Red Hat went public and wanted to do something else. He wasn't sure what. Lulu Tech Circus was what he came up with. Gart and I and a small group of other people worked like crazy to put on a half-baked idea at the state fairground. And the day after it was done, after we'd all worked, all weekend with no sleep, Bob fired everyone except for Gart and I. Pretty much everybody. And he said, I have this other website, and I want it to be maybe publishing related, maybe academic textbook, but you know, I have the engineer and designer, 2 engineers. Maybe you guys can work on that. So that became a company called Lulu.com, which is still around, still in Raleigh. And what we ended up figuring out is the business model there was, there's a phrase you've probably heard but haven't thought that much about, user-generated content, which back in the early 2000s was a novel concept. It was before YouTube, right? The user-generated content that existed then that people talked about was mostly blogs, and there were photography sites where people put up photographs. But what Lulu allowed people to do, and again, we made this up. It's not like Bob was bankrolling it, but he didn't really have a notion as to what it would be. But what it ended up being was people would take content that they created, sometimes a novel, maybe a computer software manual, could be anything. They put it on the internet, and using a print-on-demand digital manufacturing model, if someone bought that, then a copy would be produced on demand and shipped to that person. And the person that created the content would earn something. This would become the template for Spoonflower's business model as well. Lulu, ironically, I mean, Amazon went into the business, and Lulu is still around but never got particularly big, but Bob doesn't care. So
You have $1 billion, you know,
right,
whatever.
he owns a
Right,
football
right.
team, you know.
Pet project.
It's a pet project. My boss at Lulu, Gart, I quit Lulu because I'm that kind of.
It seems to be a theme,
I'm a
Stephen.
short-termer, basically. And I quit, and I was consulting, and Gart was still running Lulu on Bob's behalf, and Gart got fired about a year later. And we had coffee, and this is Gart, by the way. We had coffee, and I said, you know, nobody's done anything like what we did for Lulu with fabric. And I was inspired in that by the fact that I have a wife who really likes to sew. At the time, there was not social media other than blogs, but she had a blog, and she would blog about things that she sewed. And there were many other women doing the same thing. That year, a company called Etsy had been launched as well. And I was really fascinated by all this that was going on, Kim's blogging and the interaction. And Gart and I had this conversation about whether or not it would be possible to do print on demand with textiles. And Gart pointed out to me, which I didn't know, that there was a college of textiles at NC State. So I looked on the calendar, and they had an open house. So I went there, and lo and behold, they had a big inkjet printer running student projects, you know. And I was like, yeah, this it's just a big inkjet printer. I mean, I'm pretty sure I could operate that. And there was a sales guy there. I sold it to them. I was like, how much is this? And he said, yeah, about $40,000, which is a lot. And but you know, like a car,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? So yeah, you know, I came back to Gart, and I was like, well, let's trial this out, and we don't have to buy a printer right away. We could just test the concept. This is before Kickstarter, right? So, you know, I set up a blog, and I put up, among other things, a survey. Have you ever thought about designing your own fabric? You know, and Kim submitted it. My wife submitted it to a blog called Sew Mama Sew, that had pretty big readership, and they linked to it. They said, here's these people, they're thinking about starting this company. And you know, we had 100 responses like within a day. So I, you know, said, I think it's a pretty good idea. But what we did, we decided to trial it. There was a place in near NC State that also had one of these big inkjet printers. We paid a guy we'd worked with at Lulu a very small amount to put together a very, very minimal website. You had to have an invitation to create an account, but if you created an account, you could upload a piece of artwork. You could experiment with putting it in repeat in 2 or 3 different ways, and you could add it to a shopping cart and you could check out. That was it. There was nothing to see. There was nothing you could browse. But we figured we could test it that way. And I think it was May 26th of 2008 that the first beta invitations went out to people who'd filled out our survey, and the first dollar transacted on the site. All you could buy was a 5-inch by 5-inch swatch of fabric, and you could only buy one, and it was only on quilting cotton. And some people bought some, and I waited a couple days, put the orders on a USB, and took it over to the place in Cary and asked them to print it. And a few days later, I went over and picked it up, and we brought it home, and Gart came over to our house. He and his wife came over, and we put the fabric on the table, dining room table. We cut it into swatches. I printed some pack slips on my printer. We stuffed it in envelopes, and I took it to the post office the next day. And we did that for most of the summer. And it was manageable because people could only order something if we sent them an invitation. But the list of people who were interested got longer and longer. So we decided to get an office.
Let me ask, why did people want to buy like a 5x? What do you do with a 5x5 swatch of your own personal design?
Well, as it turns out, you can make lots of cool things like pencil cases.
Oh, oh, you're right. My mistake.
But really, most of those early people were artists who might have had a chance to do something in repeat in school when they had a large format printer where they could try it out and see how it looked. But they'd really, in most cases, never seen their stuff on fabric. And even the professional designers, professional textile designers, didn't have a way to screw around with doing work on fabric, right? They could do it on digitally, they could put something on paper, they'd go into the fabric company, and anyway, yeah, this is a classic example of, a machine, a large format printer. All of us probably have large format prints somewhere in our house, digital prints, whether it's a photograph or, a giclée print of some sort, but you don't typically want to own a machine like that yourself. But if you use the internet to let people share it,
right.
Yeah, it's a good idea. So that's what was happening with most of those early people were artists and some hardcore sewing geeks,
It's
quilters.
It's a fat quilt.
Yeah. Well, this was just a swatch, so it could be
only a
used in a
swatch.
quilt.
Yeah.
But it was not even a quarter yard of fabric. We did offer. Second thing we offered were fat quarters. So we rented an office space in downtown Mebane that we could rent month to month for $1.50 a square foot. And it turned out it was an old sock mill, which made for a great story. It was very atmospheric with wooden floors and brick walls and arched windows. Had no fucking air conditioning or heat, and it was dusty as hell. So it was quite miserable. But it was very cheap.
Had a good story.
Yeah. So we moved in there, and we ordered our first printer from South Korea, which arrived in a box. This is the $40,000 printer. The most expensive machine. I'd never owned a new car. Most expensive machine by far that I had ever bought. And we unpacked it. That's what it looked like.
Wow.
And we thought we were in business, So we started printing. I started printing fabric. Gart was coding. And it was beautiful. These printers are just big inkjet printers. They're not dissimilar from what you probably have in your house for paper, but they've been kitted out with special fabric handling system to run a roll from one side to the other, and they use special pigment inks, water-based inks, that adhere to fabric when they're heated. There's a second step after you print it of heating it. Unfortunately, they didn't work very well, printers. And the ink didn't work very well. So the first thing I had to learn was how to fix printers and keep them running, which turned out to be a lot more difficult than I thought. So one of the things that printers dislike is dust and heat and cold. And so they need
Things you had in abundance.
they need a stable temperature with humidity. And so one of the first things I ended up having to do was buy these tents at Walmart and put them up and put the printers inside. And that was our first employee, Danielle, who had read about us on a sewing blog, had written us. She graduated from art with an art degree from UNCG, and she actually wrote to say she'd be willing to babysit while we were working, because I had pictures and videos of our youngest had just been born at that point, so sort of dragging herself around in the fabric. And anyway, we said to Danielle, yeah, we won't take you up on the babysitting, but we do need some help. So she became our first employee. So January of 2009, we've hobbled through 2008. More and more popular, but we're incredibly constrained in terms of what we can actually print. We have at this point, December of 2008, two of these printers. Neither of them work all the time. And in January 7th, the New York Times puts us on the cover of the Home and Garden section. That's a picture. This is our office in Mebane. That's my wife, Kim. And they run, so they ran a story on it, and we just got completely run over. And the wait times on orders, went from 2 weeks to 3 weeks to 4 weeks to 5 weeks to 6 weeks. The economy, if you all remember, had crashed at this point. The month that we got into our office, actually. And no one was lending, and nobody would lend to a business that just started a few months before anyway. So we had applied. We went through bank after bank, and nobody wanted to lend any money to us to buy more printers. But this is one of the dilemmas with manufacturing, is to make more money, you have to make more capital investment, right? We needed more printers. We needed better printers. We were famous at this point. In the blogosphere, we were famous. We'd been in the New York Times. And by the way, this story was scheduled to run a few days before, and it didn't show up, and I called the reporter and I said, I thought that story was coming out today. And she said, the editor said everybody's already written about you. So they spiked it. I was like, nobody's written about us other than bloggers. What are you talking about? Do you realize there are 3 of us in a room here right now, just trying to stay alive? But they ran the story, and everything was, it was the best of times and the worst of times. We had all the business we wanted, but we just couldn't print. The stimulus package passed by Obama, a lot of it went to the Small Business Administration. It was in the spring of that year. And they started to really pressure the banks to loan. And we ended up in the early summer, right when, it really seemed like things were totally lost, getting approved for a loan where we only had to come up with 25% of the value of the printers we wanted to buy. And I had plenty of home equity, so I just used that. And we've got more printers, and things started humming along. It was not smooth. I was replacing the ink for the textiles would kill these print heads. Each machine had 8 print heads, and each print head cost about $800 each. So I was buying them on like Chinese e-commerce sites, and I had a whole table with like jeweler's glasses and stuff where I was trying to fix them all the time. It was pretty nuts because we were swapping them out all the time. That's my wife, Kim, cutting fabric. She was working there whenever she could. We had a nanny who'd walk the kids around downtown Mebane so Kim could do some work. She started helping with customer service. Gart's wife was helping with bookkeeping. I was sort of running the printers and the marketing and communications, and Gart was actually teaching himself Ruby on Rails so that he could keep coding the site, because we couldn't afford to pay a software engineer to keep doing it. That is a younger me, and Gart, a younger Gart. This picture read in the News and Observer sometime that winter, and a story on what we were doing.
Dark kind of looks like somebody you want to slap in that picture.
Yeah. And this is what our website looked like then. It was just fabric. We had only one fabric, Moda quilting cotton was what we used at the time. Was it Moda? It wasn't Moda. It was, I've forgotten the name of the fabric. But yeah, you could get cotton, cotton, or cotton. And there wasn't really anything to do on the website. You could browse people's designs, but you could not yet buy them. So we knew that we wanted to create a marketplace so all these amazing textile artists could actually make their stuff available for sale. But that would require engineers, and we didn't have engineers. All we had was Gart. I'd say it was 2010, we managed to get the marketplace up and running. And for the first time, designers could make their fabrics available for sale. Someone could buy them and they could earn something from it. And we had this enormous community at that point of surface designers from all over the world. And so Spoonflower at that point was on its way to becoming the largest fabric store in the world, with the most designs. We moved to Durham, 2010. We got more of these printers.
They look like they're fancier printers.
No, these are the same,
Oh.
really. There are slight differences. At one point, we were paying a guy in North Durham to hack inkjet printers with these fabric handling systems in his garage, which didn't work very well. But the company that actually had been hacking them in order to sell us ink went out of business. So, I mean, there were many dramas along the way. For the first 5 years, we were hanging by a thread for one reason or another. Ink, machines, not able to get loans or print enough fabric. Along the way, we attracted a particular kind of employee. People who like to make things. Creative people. A lot of them artists. This woman, Janet, down in the far right, had a master's degree in textiles she'd gotten in Northern Europe. Gart is in the back. I don't know if you can see him. These costumes were all made with Spoonflower fabric by this group of people. And this is not all of them. We had teams. We had a competition. This was one team. But anyway, the character of the people that came to work for us is an important part of the story, because especially at the beginning, we couldn't pay people very much at all. $9 an hour was pretty much it, and we didn't pay ourselves anything. And so the people that came were people who were our customers. They were people who wanted to make things and were interested in that as a kind of principle. And we were very lucky to have them, and that created a certain kind of culture that persisted for quite a while. I'm not sure it still exists completely, but the employees at Spoonflower went above and beyond, and eventually we were able to pay them normal amounts as soon as we could, but at the beginning we couldn't. So in 2015, I sold most of I should add, going back to the beginning, I never wanted to be a businessman. That wasn't really how I thought of myself, and I do like doing things, and making things. And I think of myself as having made Spoonflower to some degree, but I was not the person who should have been running a company with 150 employees. And so in 2016, I stepped back. I had sold 80% of my ownership, and Gart ran the company for a couple more years, and they took more capital that eventually forced us to lose control of 51% of the company, at which point they demoted Gart and hired a professional to run the company, which was his name is Michael Jones, and he came in just before COVID. And when COVID hit, everybody started making masks, everyone with an Etsy shop, right? And they all got their fabric from Spoonflower. So Spoonflower, their business exploded. I mean, it was already growing and doing well, but they had to, knock out all the offices and shove printers into every nook and cranny. And anyway, in this picture, Dr. Fauci is wearing the immune cells design by Hodgepodge Bricolage, who was actually one of his a grad student who worked for him. So she made it specifically for him. That's what I was told. But yes, this picture went around the world, and Gart emailed it to me, and he said, "This is the best." Like before that, the best was like Martha Stewart giving he and I an award, like in New York. It was quite hysterical because we're poorly dressed, guys. Anyway, Martha Stewart giving us an award was hilarious to us. But this surpassed that for Gart in great moments in Spoonflower history. And I don't think the video is going to work. But anyway, Spoonflower today, a year ago, Michael Jones, who runs it now, sold the whole company to Shutterfly. And that's been great. So for example, we had a lot of artists, people around the world, 10,000 artists probably, making significant amounts of money from Spoonflower, as well as Etsy sellers. And that's just on fabric and wallpaper, which Spoonflower now produces. And when Shutterfly bought Spoonflower, the first, I think, 200 or 300 of those artists, at least at this point, have their designs available for sale on products across many other websites, stationery and all kinds of other stuff. So the opportunities for them have expanded even more. And the manufacturing is still here in Durham. We closed an office in Berlin, and there have been some changes that have not fallen the same way on everyone. But the company is great, and I'm certainly still very proud of what they're doing.
Are you still a partial owner anyway?
I am nothing now.
Oh.
No.
That's not how we think.
Yeah.
Do you miss it?
I did for a while, but I've come to peace with knowing what I'm good at and not good at. It doesn't bother me now.
One of the things when you guys were getting going, when Kim, I associated with Kim in my mind, was that like she was the one who, in my recollection, had like the in with the culture.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And like it was like you guys had this idea, let's make a business. She's like, and you're gonna make this business in this sector, which is what I know. And like you guys were running like weekly contests and stuff, like who's gonna update the coolest thing? Or it seemed like at the time it was targeting like crafters and like people at home who like wanted to make stuff and had wanted to create their own things, like hobbyists.
Yeah.
And it seemed like when I years and years ago, when you guys were still in somewhat early stages, it seemed like the like it was sort of a balance at that time between selling fabrics to people, but also as much or more so, like people like, I have a great idea for fabric I want to work with, and it's in my head, and I want to have it in reality, and then sew a quilt or a pillow out of it or something. And when I went on this week to see what Spoonflower has become, it seemed much more a marketplace for like ideas that someone else has already come up with, and will sell you the fabric to do your project.
Yeah, it has shifted. At this point, I mean, Spoonflower's footprint is so huge because it has, 1,000,000 designs probably, and you can get any of those designs on, 20 different fabrics and 5 different wallpapers, as well as, some finished goods, pillows, and tablecloths or napkins or dish towels. The marketplace eclipsed the rest of it probably 2011.
Oh, so fairly early.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question about the machines.
Yeah.
So, to me, listening to you talk about the machines was one of the most interesting things. So I went on a tour at Spoonflower many, many years ago, probably overlapped with you when it was in RTP. And I remember them telling me that, first of all, that the machines had to have a certain amount of humidity and everything. But I remember them saying that you guys had either re-engineered or somehow altered them so that you could print on more kinds of fabric. And I'm just curious, is because now when I look at the list of fabric, it's so many different kinds. I mean, I'm always astonished that you can make it on such a wide range of fabrics, from very fleecy polar things to, the silkiest of materials.
So our role,
how did you do that?
our role in that. So, this is actually a common story, I think, in industrial progress. The technology had been developed, but was not being utilized when we came along, right? So someone has figured out it would be possible to print fabric much more efficiently digitally, right? Because when you do rotary screen press, this is how most fabric is produced. 1,000 yards is a minimum. You do thousands of yards. If you don't sell it, a lot of it is wasted. It's, of course, it's expensive to set it up. So the first 1,000 yards is very expensive. The more you do, the cheaper it gets. So this technology, digital printing, had been talked about for years. It existed basically as a sort of prototyping mechanism because there wasn't a demand. And we came along oblivious to the difficulties of manufacturing it and created a demand, which was what they had been fantasizing about, the people who were developing the inks and whatnot for years. And so we drove it in a lot of ways, and to do that we worked with different manufacturers to try and get them to produce something that would work for us or work for different fabrics. We, as I said, at one point tried hacking it ourselves with a NC State professor in his garage in North Durham. But really the role that we played there was to drive it, because they knew that if they could, the ink people and the printer people knew if they could make it, we would buy it. And at this point, the printers that Spoonflower uses are, $2 million each, and they're the size of a room. They're made in Israel.
Does anyone else buy those printers but you?
No,
But
there are
Spoonflower?
people, yeah.
Okay.
Some people do. But mostly, at this point, and this was true, from about 2012, 2013 on, people were buying them because they'd heard Spoonflower bought one.
Well, that was a question. Were you done, Teresa?
Yeah.
So the other question I had
Thank
is,
you. That was a good answer.
we talked about this at one point, because Stephen and I know each other from running. So, I don't think we were still running at this point. No, we weren't. But anyway, we would meet up from time to time for whatever. And I remember asking the question then, I don't remember what your answer was, who's coming after you? Because like for me, whenever I've had this like an idea, like I'll always say this to my daughter Isabel, like, Izzy, write this down. I've got another $1 million idea, you know. And it's like a lot of times I'm like, it's a great idea, but as soon as you were to produce it, someone in China would be selling it for a third of what you like could come up. You know, you could build it for, and you'd be, you know, you'd have like a 4-month window to sell your product, and then it would be gone. So like, who came after you to try to do what you were doing, and how did you win?
There were two things that allowed us to win.
Assassins.
Bang and bang.
Remember the Tommy gun from the very first slide.
The first was, first mover advantage and what they call the network effect. All these are internet industry cliches, and they just happen to be true in the Spoonflower case. But the network effect of, the designers had their designs up on our site. They already had their designs there, so it's easier. It'd be hard for them to take them down, and it's easier for them to add new ones there. And then the buyers are there because that's where the designs are.
Right.
So, two-sided marketplace advantage. So it's hard to catch up at that point.
Right.
Harder. And then the other thing was, the people who, the fabric textile people who were the first people to try and knock us off didn't know shit about the internet. And the internet people didn't know shit about they had no idea how hard the manufacturing was. And, we had, through having a gun at our head, developed a pretty vast knowledge of the available manufacturing technology, the inks and the printers and everything else, because we had to. I mean, because we, when that New York Times story came out, we realized our plan for scaling up is fucked. The printers don't work. We've got, it's, the best situation in the world. Everybody wants this, and we can't produce it. So we were under a high amount of stress to figure it out and talk to a lot of people, as many people as we could all over the world to try and solve it.
How did you, did that New York Times article happen just sort of serendipitously, like someone at the New York Times, like it was connected, like their mom was a sewist and had seen the traffic about Spoonflower? How did that?
And that story was the product of a well-connected friend, but most of the media attention we got happened, and this actually is still true even with social media now, but people who are journalists and editors and publications they have to produce content every day. That's their job, right? And that's its own stress, right? And so all this stuff happening on the internet with social media, in our case at the beginning, blogs, were like that was where people went for stories. So it trickles up. Starts with grassroots and editors like, hey, this is the second or third time I've seen this referred to. What's going on here, and they would assign a story to it. But the Today Show kicked our ass. We were on the Today Show a few times.
Was it bad?
Oh, the whole site would crash. As soon as the segment would air at 9 o'clock, our site would crash because we had no network engineer. And then at 10 o'clock it would air at the next time zone. The site would crash again. We'd get it back up and restart everything, and then crash again on the West Coast.
I mean, I got the impression, I felt sorry for your employees during COVID, because I know that the demand became sky high. It was not possible to meet it, and just people were so mean on your website, and I saw many messages saying we're doing the best we can, please be patient with us, and I mean it was...
That's what it was like when we started it too.
Yeah.
But with millions more people
yelling at you.
Yeah, but that's exactly what it was like. And at the beginning, we could lean on this again. It's sort of the psychology that Kickstarter ended up harnessing as well, which is where people want to feel part of the struggle of entrepreneurship and getting a business off the ground. At the beginning, I could send messages to people and post and say, you know, we are absolutely floored. Thank you so much. You know, and we're so sorry. And it had meaning. But, you know, in the era of COVID, you know, and this website's already, you know, huge. You don't get that sympathy.
I'm glad you guys survived it.
Yeah, me too. Well, my Michael, the guy that runs it now, did it, and Gart, who was still working as operations manager, did an amazing job responding really fast. And
what do you do now besides entertain us?
yeah, you know, drive kids around mainly. I do some volunteer stuff, but I don't do very much. I should do more.
I'd like to flip the conversation for a second from the creator side to the people who are, I guess, the end users. My mom ran a wallpaper department in New York in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and I remember I was in high school, junior high school, spending a lot of time there and fiddling with the books myself, but watching people handle physically, tactfully these books, blocks,
Of wallpaper,
and
yeah.
the grass clods, and the laborious decision of, you know, making a decision about what to do with,
Yeah.
with their own environments, and then wallpaper kind of fell out of fashion. And so I'm curious about the consumer side, whether from your perspective, what happened? Did the possibilities fire people's imagination to increase demand for all of a sudden, hey, wallpaper is a great idea again because now it can be really hip again? Or, I mean, did you look into that side of it very
So,
much? with
just
the
for
consumer?
reference, we launched wallpaper, and this was like it was actually, even though I've never put up wallpaper in my life, or hadn't at that point, I launched wallpaper in 2011 as a sort of pet project, and part of that was that every time I went out and spoke to people, someone would say, "Well, do you do wallpaper?" Right? Because it's the same design principle.
Yep.
And nobody bought it. So we perked along from 2011 to 2015 with almost no wallpaper sales. And you know, at one point, I had to argue to even keep it as a product. And what happened in 2015? You know, like, why are jeans not skinny again? You know, I think, I mean, this is just me speculating, but like all these period drama, the limited series,
The Crown or
all of them use wallpaper and set design quite heavily, prominently, which you can understand the appeal if you're a set designer. And it just became fashionable again.
I remember seeing, I was at Cam Raleigh, and you guys they had some of your samples up. It was a show about printing and 3D printing and new wave printing.
Yeah.
And they had some Spoonflower large scale wallpapers out there. It blew my mind. I mean, as a photographer.
It's
and an
pretty
artist,
amazing.
Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
But the quality, you mean the size?
The quality at that size.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the capacity. I mean, and the same thing is true with fabric. You know, I mean, it's, you know, the capacity to be able to do almost anything that you imagine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and including photography. I mean, photos printed a very high resolution on our wallpaper. Yeah, I mean, you take any design that you like, and you can shift the colorway. I mean, if you have the wherewithal, yeah, I mean, this, you know, the control that allows you from a design standpoint is, I guess, just irresistible in some ways.
Dan, I'm going to answer the question that I thought you were asking, which is, before I bought something on Spoonflower, I had never bought fabric without touching it. Like touching fabric and seeing how it looks sort of on the, you know, pulling it off the wool was a very, very important part of choosing the fabric. And one thing that Spoonflower did is that you can buy two things. You can buy a placard that has all the different kinds of fabrics, so it's not just a word, but you can, I mean, it's only a little swatch, but at least you have a sense of the hand of it, right? And then you can order a very small piece so that you don't have to invest in your big project before you see a small part of it. I don't know if that's all the case still today, but I know that, I mean, that's what's happened in the past. It sort of convinced me, okay, I can do this, because it was a concept as someone who was buying fabric, and I was like, can that really work?
Right.
You know? And I also learned from buying different things that certain fabrics in certain colors, I didn't like how they looked. Like if I bought a piece of fabric that had lots of black, it wasn't black enough for me. It was
Right.
perfectly black, but it was, so I would then make decisions, okay, I'm going to pick a design that, you know, might have black as an outline, but it's not going to be like a full piece of fabric all black. It just I didn't care how that looked. So I learned over time from purchasing different things.
When I first thought about this, you know, the first person I asked was my wife, would you buy fabric online, right? And, you know, these are early e-commerce days still, that you would even have to ask a question like that. But she was like, yeah, it depends. I might. And the second person I asked was my friend Chris's wife, who is a modern quilter. Shields, yeah. And she said, I would never buy a fabric online.
I'm sure many people used to
Right.
feel that way.
But, you know, that's one of those things, you know, right, everything is bought on. You know, that's just the direction of society.
Being on the right side of history on that one.
Yeah,
But
so I
were
felt
willing
okay about
I
ignoring
mean, people
that.
like that, I mean, I don't know this particular case, but people who had that attitude, I think, shifted when they tried it. When they tried it, or they could get the sample, then they were like, okay. Like once you did it once and it was something
Yeah.
very beautiful that showed up, you're like, oh, okay, this can work.
But that whole first
You know?
summer when we were shipping this, cutting the stuff in our house and shipping it, I was taking it to the post office. I was holding my breath because I really had no idea what
the
people were
reaction
going to think when they actually got it. That was the whole test. That's why we didn't invest in an office or a printer. We were trying to figure that out. Like, is this something people say, I might be interested, and then when they got it, they were like, this is terrible. It's not, the black's not black, and, you know.
Do you have any sense now, this is your year, of what your yield was? You know, of the 100 people you sent something to, how many people said, oh wait, I get it, and I want 5 yards of it?
That's a good question. It's always fewer than you think.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
So
I would think so.
we've all had that experience. Like,
TikTok is bossing
I
around
s-
like 30%.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you mean like having a Chautauqua in your backyard?
That's
Sending a
that's
page out to
exactly-
60 people and 12
that's
show up?
exactly the example I was gonna use.
13, thank 13.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, I knew there were 2 people here and they had to go to something else, so they.
Yeah, it's not, you know, when you're growing a business, nothing ever really unfolds the way you've sort of fantasized that it will. But, you know, for us, you know, you're analyzing it, and the graph's always moving in the right direction. You know?
Well, I have to say, like, hearing you tell this story, like, you know, the Hollywood version of the entrepreneurial story is sort of like what happened here a bit. I mean, it's a crazy idea, it just might work. You know, hustle. A lot of crazy delay. You know, crazy
Max
things
out
that-
your credit card.
Max out the
use
credit
your
card,
home and-
triple mortgage your house.
Yep.
You know, get your wife to do the mailing. You know, while she's delivering your third child. Right? And But like, I'm like struck by like, so it's a combination of, well, I'm sorry, let me back up. But like, you're the success story. I mean, Spoonflower is a success story. But it seems, and I'm not sure if you feel this way as well, that like that story could have gone off the rails at many points.
I think about it every day, honestly.
I mean, like, it seems that, you know, like, were you hustling? Absolutely. You have a great idea. You know, were you committed? Was the time right? Yes. But, like, I don't know, like, maybe, you know, Shutterfly decided, we're going in on this, like, in 2009. Like, they've proven the model can work, and we're going to catch up. You know, we've got the resources to do it. Or, you know, Paul, what's his face?
Well, Amazon. I mean, we were worried Amazon because Amazon did it to Lulu, basically.
Right.
Yeah, you know it's a great combination of circumstance and context and good luck, as well as
Hustle.
extreme amount of risk. And
Yeah.
hustle and some amount of ingenuity.
Can you talk a little bit? Why did you go from Mebane to Durham?
Well, employees.
Ah, okay.
We were trying to hire people who lived in either Durham or Raleigh,
Yeah.
and getting them to go to Mebane was a big ask.
At $9 an hour.
Durham was easy.
I mean, I had a question about that as well when you're telling the story. Like, you know, if you had tried to pull off like paying people who had sort of a belief in the vision and in the idea of crafting and whatever, like, you might not have found those people in a different place. Like if you had been in, I don't know, Indianapolis.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, maybe you just needed a big enough, like, metro market where there's enough percentage of people who are like, that sounds fun to me, I want to do that. Or, you know, I mean, they weren't doing it for fun, but I feel like they had to sort of be kooky enough and, like, artistic enough and young enough. Like, you know, probably most of your employees, I'm guessing, were like 25 to 35.
Yeah, they were
and
mostly
artistic.
super young. Yeah.
Well, the College of Textiles, I wonder how, like, did they play a pretty big role?
Well, it did. I mean, they ended up promoting us, and I would go talk to classes there, and we hired a fair number of those people, for sure.
Was the New York Times article like the tide turning, or was it like 6 months after that when you were able to fulfill orders?
Well,
like,
right. The most significant tide turned when those Small Business Administration backed loans came through, which was like the end of the spring, beginning of the summer.
2009.
In 2009, yeah. And, you know, but it's like walking the plank, or, you know, building a bridge, nailing one plank to the end of the last one, and going out a little farther, and nailing another plank, going a little farther. You know, you get one loan, and you start planning for the next loan. That's what we did.
Would you guys have been able to do what you did if, like, that Americans Recovery Act, ARA, or whatever it was, happened? If that had not happened, because
I think we'd have been screwed.
Really?
Well, actually, we had a backup plan. The backup plan was, this is good.
Selling plasma, lots of plasma.
We had some local VCs who were following us, and we didn't think we were going to get a loan. We didn't want to raise money. We liked the idea of bootstrapping the business. And,
right. The difference being...
Which VCs?
Which VCs?
Yeah.
David Jones and Jason Kaplan, who are now Bull City Ventures. Do you know them?
I do.
Yeah. So they were close to what we were doing. They've been super helpful. And another guy named Lister Delgado with. Do you know him too? Yeah. So
Jane has it.
I probably shouldn't. I'm not sure I should tell this story actually now. Now that you say
Never
that.
mind.
But you didn't want to give up equity to a
Not gonna
VC.
list her good idea.
Yeah. Well, so they were going to go in together. So we had actually, you know, gone through this whole process of doing a deal with them, and they were going to give us $1 million, and I think they wanted to value the company at $2.5 million or something. And we were moving forward as if that was what we were going to do. That, you know, this might be obvious to you, but if you don't think about it, this sort of thing a lot, it might not be. You know, that kind of money is incredibly expensive, right? Because
That's 40% of your company, right?
they're taking a lot of risk. They're taking a risk that a bank doesn't want to take. Money from a bank is not risky because the bank won't give it to you unless it's secured by something, but it's very cheap. All you pay is the interest. So in this case, we went into a 30-day due diligence period with the VCs, and in that 30 days, the bank loans came through, and we walked away. We were runaway bride, and I'm pretty good friends with David and Jason. And they eventually invested in the company in 2015 when I sold some shares, and it made a little money for them. Shutterfly bought it for $225 million. But if they'd gotten it at the $2.5 million valuation, their company that would be 100 times more than they've made from any other deal. 50 times more, anyway. So we joke about it now.
Sucks for them.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a stupid question. I don't know anything about business. I don't pretend to know. But when you walked away from the company, does that mean that you were basically bought out and you never see any more money from Spoonflower? Or do you still get some kind of revenue stream from them?
The way that works is you own shares in a company, right?
Mhm.
So a percentage of the total.
Mm-hmm.
And in my case, I sold 80% of what I owned, which I got money for,
Mm-hmm.
and I still owned a certain number of shares. The percentage dilutes because as new owners come in, everything shifts.
Mm-hmm.
So I still owned a fair amount, but when Shutterfly bought it, the whole company sold outright. So anyone who had shares, including our employees,
Mm-hmm.
got paid.
Got it. So they don't pay revenue to anybody. They own it outright and free.
Shutterfly owns it outright, but Shutterfly's employees also have shares in Shutterfly. So, you know, that is a common structure for that kind of company. So, you know, there are Spoonflower employees who now have shares in Shutterfly. It's all complicated. Some people chose cash over shares.
Sorry, it's a basic question. I
No, it's
understand how it works.
Look, unless I'd gone through this, I wouldn't either. I had to be educated. So I appreciate the question.
But how many years until you could pay yourself something, anything?
2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And,
How'd you
know,
live for 2 years?
Credit cards. I maxed out all my credit cards. We bounced checks. I mean, it was a mess.
We could have brought you some soup.
How was Kim, like, what was Kim's perspective? You had 2.5 kids or 3 kids. You had a house, a mortgage. Like, was she on board as on board as you were?
Well, both my parents died before I started Spoonflower, so I had paid off our mortgage, which is how I had a mortgage to use, home equity to use, yeah. But Kim, it's funny, has anyone done the Ancestry DNA test or something similar? You know how they have traits that they will tell you whether or not you have they will suggest you might have a propensity for this or that. And as the database gets bigger, they have more traits. So they'll send you an email saying, oh, you know, now you can see. So the most recent one was, now you can see what your genetic propensity for risk taking. And I'm like, oh, well, that should be interesting. So
That should be pretty high.
because I'm basic. I'm not a particularly brave person, you know. I don't think. But so I was curious to see what this would say. And I have a higher propensity than 60% of the population, according to this test. And I sent it to Kim, and she went on and looked hers up, and she's at the top.
I bet.
top 10%. So
I would've
she
guessed.
never blinked an eye.
Wow.
Which that in her case, it's definitely accurate. She didn't give a shit.
I mean, that is an astonishing genetic makeup to have, given how stressful it must have been. It must have been
Yeah,
terribly stressful.
I was more stressed than her, I think, but it was stressful for her too.
Well, Stephen, I mean, everybody's going to ask questions, but I do want to give you a pause. Thank you so much for sharing the story.